by Sunnis, and Sunnis fight everybody else. We have created a nightmare, and we've continued to be duplicitous in our dealings with it, supporting dictators when it suits us, deposing them when it doesn't, imposing kings on tribal systems, which are totally unsuited. The people of Iraq and the people of the Middle East generally have precisely the same rights as you or I. They are children of God. And they have the same right to develop their own system of governance in consistency with their own cultural standards. What right have we got in our arrogance to try and impose our forms on them? Particularly when it's done for greed. And the paradox is that our greed for oil funds the country of Saudi Arabia. The rulers of Saudi Arabia are the Ibn Saud family, who are members of an extremely militant and zealous and extreme sect of Islam known as the Wahhabi. They have used a large percentage of our petrodollars to fund madrasas preaching just that type of vehement extremism throughout the Muslim world. We have sown and we are now reaping. It's our problem. The trouble is that while there is a list of American war dead and British war dead, which is regrettable and very, very painful to the families concerned, I personally, as a human being, am far more concerned with the 600 or 700, or maybe 800,000 Iraqis that have been killed and continue to be killed. The fact that these people are expected to live in peace in a country with no infrastructure, poor roads, no water, intermittent electricity, because we have destroyed them all.
Well, in reality, this has been going on for 1,000 years or more, hasn't it? We've been doing this since the very first crusade.
Well, Plato once said it is far easier to make war than to keep peace. And that is sadly just as true today as it was then. And I am lucky, I'm a member of 2 orders wherein people from every religious faith known to mankind can sit and share and live in harmony together. That's ultimately the fruit of spirituality. It's about how do you deal with people.
So what you're pointing out is like a thread that runs through the religions, an understanding of the gnosis, the spiritual paths.
Well, spirituality can be described in 2 different ways. On one of the paths I follow, a man came to his teacher about 50 years ago and said, you expect me to follow a spiritual path? I'm a Lapsed Baptist. And he was told there is a difference between spirituality and religion. He said, what's the difference? And the teacher very wisely refused to tell him. He said, you want to find that out, you go and ask an expert. I'll give you one. And the gentleman was sent to see a Jesuit priest called Father Ed. And he posed the question to Ed, and Ed turned around and said, my son, to answer that question, I've got to tell you a little story, you see. Spirituality is the fresh spring water of God's love for all of creation, which arises naturally near the top of the mountain, and then under God's wonderful gift of gravity, trickles down the mountainside and sustains and refreshes and strengthens everything it touches. Now religion, that's something else again. That's the well-intentioned man-made plumbing, which often makes the water go uphill where it shouldn't go, and will usually whistle it past your arse without the benefit of a tap. Now being man-made, it always pollutes the water. So if you've any doubts, my son, you go back to the spring, which is what I and thousands of others have been doing for a long time. But perhaps the best description of it was by a modern Sufi teacher called Sheikh Rajiv Fragere in a wonderful book called Love is the Wine. He said, spirituality is a river that descended to earth through Adam, may God grant him peace. It has been refreshed and strengthened by the great prophets Abraham, Moses, Elisha, Jesus, may God grant him peace. Strengthened again by the great prophet Muhammad, may his name be blessed, and may God grant him peace. It is a river that knows no boundaries in space or culture or time. And yet, sadly, but understandably, every race, every creed, every culture claims it for its own. To which I would add, that river arises in your heart. Bathe in its healing waters and go with the flow, it will lead you to God. The ultimate spiritual teaching is surrender. Surrender to the will of God, trying to align my will with the will of God as I do not pretend to understand. Seeking knowledge of His will for me and the power to carry it out. And the closer I can get to that, the more peaceful, the more productive, and the more creative my life becomes. It's a process of transformation. It does not happen overnight for anyone. One of my closest colleagues is probably one of the most renowned Sufi teachers in the West. A man of immense compassion. A beautiful writer whose book, The Alchemy of the Heart, I could recommend to anyone. But you have to study under him for 12 years before you're admitted as a pupil. Then the real work begins.
We don't have time these days.
I do, but everybody else wants instant coffee, instant answers, instant results.
We're all on the hamster's wheel.
Yeah, and once we step onto that hamster's wheel, and here's where our talk has gone full circle, and once we're gulled into becoming consumers by the one-eyed monster in the corner of the living room, there's no time. And the most precious gift we all have is time. It's life itself. But ultimately, we're all children of God, and we should behave like brothers. And Martin Luther King said some years ago, we've learnt to fly in the air like birds, we have yet to learn how to walk on the earth like brothers. And that is the essence of the spiritual path, to learn just that. And frankly, I don't think I can act.
What you're telling me is that the Cathars seem to have originated some concepts from the Essene, if not the Essene themselves. The Templars were going back to the Palestine to reclaim.
Yes.
Reclaim doesn't mean claim, it means reclaim. It means that they believed that that was their land to start with.
That's right.
So are we looking at the Cathars and the Templars and these Rex?
The Rex Deus, they're all strands coming back to the same source.
They all go back to the Essene.
The Essenes were one of the principal staging posts on the way, but in fact you have to trace it much further.
I was just going to say, do the Essene go back to Egypt?
Yes.
And does that link at all to Moses and Aaron?
Everything goes back to Egypt, for the spiritual path that we treasure in the West pervades the great religions of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. It has its origins in Egypt, and probably before that, but they're not traceable. There were people in Egypt at the beginning of the Pharaonic period known as the Shemsahor. They were seeking spiritual paths. They became the ruling elite and became the hereditary royal family and hereditary priesthood of Egypt. And their abiding principle was, yes, they wanted power and rank and all the privileges that went with it, but the fruits of their spiritual insight, in engineering, in philosophy, in medicine, were spread throughout the community.
They almost sound like messianic kings.
They were.
Right.
Now, Abraham was part of this. It is claimed in Genesis that he was born in Ur, but you must remember that that book was written in Babylon, where the Jews were captive after a disastrous war in which the Jews had been allied with the Egyptians, and they had to write out or diminish anything that smacked of Egyptian connection. It also says in Genesis that Abraham was married to his sister.
Yes.
There was only one family in all the cultures at that time where that was permitted, the royal family of Egypt. So Abraham was Egyptian and probably the royal family. Now, I'm not the first one to stumble onto this. If you read the works of the 12th century medieval rabbi and